So the YouTube user Rorschach Romanov posted a video response to me, another example of a white person talking about race, and he wants to have a debate with me, which, I should know that the YouTube medium is suited for debate, and that unless you know just simple users like he and I posting responses to one another engage in debate, we're not going to get any attention. To get attention by doing anything but debating, we're going to need to have fancy computer graphics and a whole production crew, and that, we don't have that. So I get why he wants to debate. That's what this medium fosters. But I don't really want to do that. I would rather have a sort of a slower, more self-reflective conversation, which is to say, I'm not coming to this claiming to have totally understood exactly how, let's call it the problem of race is to be solved. I don't know. I'm trying to understand my role in that, and I call myself a white person, but the whole point of my last video was to point out that any sense of a fixed identity is always going to be a kind of fetish. And, I'm really not interested in identity politics. I'm not interested in, this notion of social justice in the context of an identity politics, right? What I would like to defend is the possibility of society, the possibility of civilization, of being civil with one another, of living together in a community of mutuality. I'm trying to defend that. I'm not trying to defend any particular form of identity, white identity, black identity, uh, Western identity, as opposed to Eastern, Southern. Like, there are these sorts of stereotypes, these categories that we can, and in fact must use to engage with the world, but we should recognize them as, being fluid, relational, and then and basically relativistic. White identity, if such a thing exists, it's clearly defining itself in opposition to black identity, which is why white supremacists hate blacks. There's a structural necessity to those two things arising in conjunction with one another in the psyches of white supremacists. You can't be a white supremacist without hating black people. So it may seem like it's just a love of white culture that produces a white supremacist, but no, I think it's an othering in order to produce this false sense of identity. And, human beings become obsessed with identities and dependent upon um, identities because they give us security. The world is frightening, and we experience, as animals trying to survive in an environment, we experience anxiety in the face of of this world. And so to try to fixate on some specific uh, idea that or ideal that we think defines us, it protects us. It functions to protect us psychologically from the reality of our vulnerability, the fact that our identities are always at risk in coming into relationship with others, and that there's this structural fusion between the ideas of self and other. So when I talk about, you know, planetization and the way that, whether we like it or not, racial differences can no longer separate us. I don't mean to, as Rorschach put it, quoting Zizek, to announce my immediate participation in universality. No, universality should be fully mediated. I'm looking for a concrete universal. And again, what the hell, we're referring to Zizek and Hegel, and ideas like abstract and concrete universals, we're assuming a great deal of reading has been done. But that's precisely the point about the medium over the immediate, is that when we start to acknowledge the difference between a YouTube debate, between faces on a screen and like letters on a page, and the way that we slow down in our literate thinking as opposed to being so speedy and catchy and so on in our visual video medium. So we need to recognize that the medium, right? But the idea of planetization is just that on a genetic level, race is a fiction, right? On an ideological level, it's obviously a fiction. And psychologically and socially, we construct racial ideas, racial identities together. It's part of how we define one another. But that practice of definition through identity politics, I think, is tearing apart the fabric of our society. And we need to find a new way of differentiating ourselves. I'm not trying to say that we can eliminate difference. That would be a sort of immediate universality. We can't eliminate difference. We need to find a more harmonious way of differentiating ourselves. And, I think we can't totally demonize capitalism. And I wouldn't, I'm not a Marxist. I think there are a lot of problems with communism. What I said in my last video, in the comment under my last video in the comments about Marxism, is that Marx was right in what he critiqued, but wrong in what he attempted to reconstruct, to replace it with. But we do have to acknowledge that the way that capitalism has fostered the development of the individual, that's an important achievement that should be acknowledged. Now, capitalism has fostered the development of the individual to the detriment of society, of community, but I think in order to establish, a concretely universal sense of community, we will need to acknowledge the individual as sort of the locus of value and meaning. But of course, then we must recognize that the individual is always already embedded in a network of relationships to other individuals. So there's this strange paradox, right, where communitarianism and individualism, communism and capitalism, however you want to talk about these things, they require one another. We need a hybridization, because the individual, to be a free individual with rational agency and so on, you need a huge support structure, a society and a culture and an educational system that is already in place when you were born. A human being, biologically speaking, will not just, without that huge educational structure, become a free, rational individual, right? That it takes a community to produce such an individual. It takes a loving community to produce free individuals. And it takes free individuals to produce a loving community. So to side with one or the other, to value only the individual or to value only the community, I think is to miss the point that we need both. So a complex interplay between opposites, not as dualistically opposed, but as a polarity, sort of self-intensifying polarity. And so when we talk about the evolution of the human species and the move into a planetized civilization, we're talking about the complex interplay of individuals and communities. And it's important to think in these, I was going to say more abstract terms, but in a sense they're becoming more concrete, and notions of racial identity are becoming more abstract. Because, what is whiteness? Tell me. Other than a historical and cultural construct that a certain group of people have created in order to somehow um, relieve themselves of the need to recognize the relationships that embed them in the wider world. So yeah, I don't know. There's more I want to say, but I want to respond to some specific points that were brought up in Rorschach's video. But I think I'll do a part two and leave this as a sort of just general response.